Hi, this is Eve with True Crime and Coke. You are about to listen to an EDUsode. These are shorter episodes dedicated to educational information ranging from forensic terminology, crime facts, body processes, to interesting FBI files. But if you want to hear anything about true crime, disappearances, conspiracies, hauntings, and anything strange or unusual, then go to one of my regular episodes. Disclaimer: I am not associated in any way to the criminal or medical field. So in other words, I may not even know what I'm talking about. Now that that's out of the way, let's begin. Hello, welcome to EDUsode 8, where we will continue discussing investigating drowning deaths and autopsies. So let's get started. Let's talk about investigating drowning deaths at pools. According to the National Safe Kids campaign, a swimming pool is 14 times more likely than a motor vehicle to be involved in the death of a child 4 years old and under. Investigators' first actions should entail documenting the location and position of the body, if it is still on the scene. If the body has already been moved from the scene, the location found needs to be determined through extensive witness interviewing. Other important observations will include determining if there is any indication of a delayed call for rescue personnel. If the complainant states they pulled the child out of the water and began cardiopulmonary resuscitation, the pool sides or pool deck may be wet. Likewise, the would-be rescuer's clothes may be wet. As in any drowning incident, it is imperative the investigator determine the accuracy of information obtained on scene. Does the evidence on scene support or contradict witness statements? Additional documentation includes recording ambient and water temperature, collection of water samples, examination and seizure of clothing worn by the decedent, assessment of evidence of cleanup, such as towels, mops, or buckets, and a scene sketch. Photographs of the scene and any barriers placed for the purpose of restricting access to the pool are essential. Recordings from poolside audiovisual equipment such as security cameras should be obtained with a copy sent to the MEC or the medical examiner coroner. Hotel, school, and recreation center pools are larger and most often indoors and present additional circumstances the investigator needs to be aware of when conducting an investigation in this type of environment. Unlike outdoor backyard pools, these pools have a variety of different circumstances that may hinder visibility, safety, and judgment of those who are using them. All these circumstances must be considered when drawing conclusions regarding a drowning incident. Documentation should include location and positioning of lighting, presence of lifeguards, normal hours of operation, and number of swimmers permitted. During the interviewing of witnesses, it is important to use the show me technique by leading any potential witnesses through their actions, starting with what they were doing just before the incident and leading them through what they did during the incident. This will establish positioning of the witness, which may expose potential problems in determining what they could or could not see. In some instances, a reenactment may be warranted to clarify information or resolve questions that remain unanswered, such as, why didn't anyone see the victim at the bottom of the pool? In this instance, the investigator should obtain a rescue mannequin or other object that can be used to show the victim's position and location. The mannequin or other object should resemble the victim's description as close as possible to allow for the most accurate assessment. Place the mannequin in the position in which the decedent was located and have each potential witness stand where they were at the time the incident occurred. Many would be surprised at how difficult it can be to see a body at the bottom of a swimming pool, even in the best of conditions. Let's move on to boating fatalities. Vessels involved in a watercraft fatality pose many challenges for the investigator. Injuries to any victims will usually be caused by a collision or propellers. Collision injuries need to be documented as thoroughly as possible, and consultation with the forensic pathologist may be necessary. This is because pre-accident injuries may also be present, and the investigator will need to determine when these injuries occurred. Post-accident injuries will be the result of the body striking an object or an object striking the victim. This is also the reason it is very important to document damage to the vessel. Does the injury match the damage? Is damage present that could have caused a head injury, for example? If not, the investigator needs to find out who and what caused those injuries. Propeller injury will usually be easier to determine when it has occurred in the antemortem period. Propeller injuries will most likely be located below the waist and along the extremities, but can also be found on the head and torso. This is because when a person is in the water, the body is usually vertical and the legs are submerged, where propellers can cause these injuries. If the propeller damage is located along the back, then they typically are post-mortem injuries. When floating, bodies typically assume a face and extremities down position, with the back exposed to the surface. A passing boat would then cause injuries to the back. Propeller injuries will appear as multiple and parallel chop wounds. Faster, high-speed boats will cause shallower injuries and the lacerations will be close together. Larger, slower vessels will cause deeper, penetrating injuries that are further apart. The type of propeller injuries can help an investigator build a description of a possible involved vessel that left the scene. Much like diving fatalities, which we will cover next, boating-related fatalities also require the testing of any safety equipment involved to assure that it did not play a part in the fatality. Inspection of any personal flotation devices or PFDs or life jackets used will include checking to make sure they are U.S. Coast Guard approved, checking the size to make sure it was a proper fit for the victim, the condition for rips or worn or broken straps and buckles, the buoyancy of the material, which must not be crushed or deteriorated, and for evidence of any non-factory alterations. A fatal boating accident can present many challenges for the investigator. Establishment of physical contact between two or more vessels, vessel to person or vessel to a stationary object, must be determined. The most reliable evidence of contact is material transfer. Some examples of material transfer include human tissue, hair, paint, skin, and blood, which must be properly collected and submitted following established chain of custody procedures, as must be done with recovery of any type of evidence. On to diving fatalities. Generally speaking, many scuba fatalities can be attributed to diver panic and lack of training. In order to come to this conclusion, it is important to remember that all equipment used by a diver must be tested to assure it was working properly at the time of the death. Therefore, it is highly recommended that the investigating agency seek assistance from a reputable organization in testing this equipment. There are several common factors in scuba fatalities. There is usually sufficient air leak in the tank. There is very little air contained in the buoyancy control device, or BCD. The weight belt is still worn, which divers are trained to remove or drop in an emergency. Inspection of equipment such as the regulator and the BCD failed to reveal any flaws or malfunctions and was worn correctly, and the air quality in the scuba tank is well within safety limits. Considering all these factors, one can conclude that diving fatalities are usually caused by panic. Investigators should also be familiar with complicated and unusual sites of recovery. Settling tanks, for instance in a sewage treatment plant, pose a challenge for recovery personnel, which may include visibility hazards, mechanical hazards, health hazards, and liability. Special training is required to enable a safe and effective recovery from this type of environment. Submerged vehicle hazards included entanglement or entrapment for recovery divers, location and recovery of any persons inside, and documentation of the scene. Every effort should be made to determine the location of each victim within the vehicle. It is important to remember that a submerged vehicle with occupants is a crime scene, so diligence must be taken to preserve evidence inside the vehicle. Documentation of interior and exterior evidence, such as damage, should be done prior to removing the vehicle from the water. This is because, in many cases, the vehicle will be damaged in the recovery process. Having divers close any windows prior to removal from the water will help eliminate evidence loss. Before we go in depth on autopsy with drowning victims, let's first talk about infant and fetal death drownings, because it's a little bit different. Newborn infants or fetuses recovered from toilets, bathtubs, or other fluid-filled confined spaces may represent death resulting from precipitous delivery and drowning, delivery of a non-viable fetus, or unattended delivery of an otherwise viable infant with an unanticipated obstetrical complications. Infant mortality associated with water birth, a method of planned delivery in an aqueous environment to ease maternal delivery, is reported and an additional consideration in the workup. Owing to the inherent physical disparity between a caretaker and an infant or small child abuse by homicidal drowning or in conjunction with blunt force trauma or asphyxia must be considered. Corroboration of findings with any statements given by the mother or other witnesses is necessary for proper interpretation and determination of cause and manner of death. The developmental stage in regards to mobility and access to bodies of water, whether in the bathtub, pool, pond, or other environment, becomes particularly relevant in the corroboration of statements. Signs of a recent delivery may be evident at the death scene with findings of items such as bloody garments or towels or finding of the discarded placenta, which should be retrieved. There may exist medical records of recent hospitalization that confirm a recent delivery. Subsequent to a postmortem radiography, examination for external and internal signs of injury in addition to any supportive signs of drowning is in order. Patterned or clustered injuries, especially blunt force types and especially of the face and neck, are worrisome for inflicted injury inclusive of suffocation and strangulation. Documentation of signs of infection with microbial analysis as necessary. Natural disease and congenital abnormalities, along with utilizing anthropometric measurements to assess the degree of maturation, is also of importance. The findings of non-traumatic pathology with lethal potential or previability can be helpful in ruling out death by drowning. Signs of maceration signaling intrauterine fetal demise with stillbirth would support a historical account of lack of in utero movement or no movement or respiratory effect upon delivery. Gross and microscopic examination of the placenta and any attached umbilical cord, if available, may reveal pathologies associated with premature delivery, such as placental abruption, cord abnormalities, and chorioamnionitis. A pediatric pathologist could be consulted on cases with uncertain placental findings or when there is a need to discern or characterize congenital abnormalities. Importantly, in cases of a fetus or infant found submerged in confined locations, such as the toilet or bathtub, the determination of a live birth, stillbirth, or evidence of resuscitative efforts must be attempted. While many of these indicators are unreliable, determination may be aided by in situ examination of the lungs for inflation versus atelectasis, performance of the hydrostatic or float test on lungs and viscera, or documentation of air in the gastrointestinal system. So really, to put it in layman's terms, is that during the autopsy, they are able to determine if resuscitative efforts were performed or not. So if a parent insists that they did do resuscitative efforts and the autopsy findings show otherwise, then more questions need to be asked. Underwater birth with death or decompositional changes may preclude or confound this determination, however. The finding of food in the stomach will provide more definitive evidence of an interval of extrauterine survival. Microscopic examination for signs of aspiration, over or under expansion of alveoli, pulmonary edema, diffuse alveolar damage, and pneumonia may be helpful in the determination of the peritermal death circumstances, including documentation of any evidence of a survival interval. So to put that in layman's terms, they are able to determine, like, let's say the infant has some food in its stomach. Maybe the mother breastfed it and decided to drown it, but the mother says it was born dead. Then you obviously know she's lying. Or let's say there is no food in the stomach, but the mother insists that the baby was born dead. They are still able to tell through autopsy if it was born breathing or not, because it will have this, water and all that stuff in its lungs, and you can see the effect of drowning on the previous alive infant, and then again you would know that the mother was lying. Microscopic examination of a sample of the drowning media with comparison to lung tissue and gastric contents may be helpful for the determination of drowning. Even chemical analysis of the drowning media for comparison with body fluids can be done. It should be noted, though, that neither of these analyses are performed with any frequency due to unreliability. Histological examination of cutaneous, visceral, or skeletal injuries for signs of inflammation in healing stage may be useful in confirming a refuting statements, documenting repeated physical abuse, or clarifying the timeline of events leading to death. Drowning actually remains a serious public health concern, and it claims an estimated 362,000 lives per year worldwide across all socioeconomical classifications, and has remained under close observation by the World Health Organization and its signatories. A significant number of water-related deaths are attributed to accidental drowning, while a smaller but still significant number represent suicidal or homicidal drowning. Others involve a combination of drowning precipitated by injury, intoxication, or environmental extremes. Others involve victims that die from injury, intoxication, or a natural disease entity of such significance as to preclude the drowning process while near or in water. While there may be an initial presumption that all water-related deaths are accidental drownings, other possibilities must be considered in the investigation of these types of deaths, as drowning as a cause of death is a diagnosis based on the exclusion of other potential causes. The coordinated investigative efforts of multiple agencies and disciplines are required not only for the designation as drowning as the cause of death, but also for death certification. It's very important that a drowning death certificate is accurate because the WHO, or World Health Organization, keeps track of this, and it helps determine where money is sent for educational resources, education for prevention of drownings, and all of that. I'm going to end the EDUsode here. So next midweek, I will do one, and we'll start with the autopsy and stuff. I might end up having to do 2 EDUsodes next week because there's so much information. So that way we're just not talking about drowning deaths for weeks at a time. So until then, have a good evening.